Three 20mm rounds tore through my left wing. The questions kept coming. Over the next 3 months, flying missions almost daily, I shot down 8 more Japanese aircraft, each one easier than the last, each one meaning less than the one before. The tactics I'd helped develop were working perfectly. American pilots were dominating the sky. We were winning. But winning felt different than I'd imagined it would back in 1942. Back then, every mission had been desperate, every victory hard-won. Now it felt mechanical, professional. We had better aircraft, better training, better tactics. We had numbers. The Japanese were fighting with courage, but without resources, without support, without hope. In November, we participated in strikes on Japanese bases in Luzon. Wave after wave of American aircraft, hundreds at a time, hitting targets that couldn't adequately defend themselves. The anti-aircraft fire was intense, and we lost aircraft to ground fire, but in the air, there was barely any resistance. The Japanese couldn't afford to send up fighters anymore. They were saving them for something else. We found out what in January 1945. Kamikazes. The first time I saw one, I didn't understand what I was seeing. A Zero diving at the fleet, not firing, not maneuvering to evade, just diving straight at one of our destroyers. I thought the pilot had been hit, was crashing. Then he made a correction, lined up on the ship, and I realized he meant to do that. I'd been flying for 3 years. I'd seen men die in every way combat could kill them, but I'd never seen someone choose death as a tactic, never seen someone use their aircraft as a weapon in itself, not caring about coming back, about surviving, about anything except hitting the target. We shot him down, me and 2 other Corsairs, put enough rounds into his aircraft that it disintegrated before it reached the destroyer. But there were more, always more, and some of them got through. I watched a kamikaze hit the USS Caldwell, saw the explosion, saw the ship burning, watched sailors jump into the water to escape the flames. That night I tried to write a report about kamikaze tactics, about how to intercept them, about the psychological impact of facing an enemy who didn't care about dying. I got 3 paragraphs in and stopped. What could I say? The tactics were obvious. Shoot them down before they reach the fleet. The psychological impact was obvious. It was terrifying. What I couldn't write about was the comparison I kept making in my head. I kept thinking about that Japanese pilot I'd let go in 1942, the one I'd watched parachute into the Pacific. Would he have volunteered for a kamikaze mission? Would he have climbed into a Zero loaded with explosives and flown it into an American ship? Maybe. Probably. The Japanese military had a culture of sacrifice that we didn't. They'd been taught that death in service of the emperor was the highest honor. We'd been taught to win and come home. Different values, different outcomes. But I kept thinking about his face, about the moment our eyes met, about the understanding that had passed between us. He hadn't wanted to die any more than I had. He'd bailed out when his engine quit, had chosen survival over going down with his aircraft. That wasn't the choice of a man eager for death. So what changed? How did an Air Force go from training pilots in survival to training them in suicide? I didn't have an answer. Still don't really. War does things to people, to nations, to logic itself. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. The kamikaze campaign intensified as we moved closer to Japan. By February, we were hitting Iwo Jima, preparing for the invasion. By March, we were striking the Japanese home islands themselves. The closer we got, the more desperate the resistance became. I flew my last combat mission on March 18, 1945 during a strike on Tokyo. It should have been routine. We'd done the same thing a dozen times. Escort bombers in, suppress enemy fighters, hit the target, get out. I was leading a 4-plane section, flying top cover at 20,000 feet. The Japanese sent up everything they had. Not just fighters, but training aircraft, obsolete biplanes, anything that could carry a bomb or fly into a ship. The sky was full of aircraft, more than I'd seen since 1942. But these weren't skilled pilots in capable aircraft. These were teenagers and old men in planes that should have been in museums, throwing themselves at us with more courage than skill. We shot them down by the dozens. Had to. They were trying to kill us, trying to kill the fleet. But it felt wrong. Felt like shooting ducks in a pond. There was no honor in it, no sense of combat between equals. Just slaughter. I got separated from my section during a turning fight with a group of Japanese fighters. Not Zeros this time, but older fixed-landing gear types, maybe Type 97s. They shouldn't have been dangerous, but there were 8 of them and 1 of me, and numbers matter even when you have better equipment. I shot down 3 of them in the first 30 seconds. The remaining 5 scattered, but one of them got clever. Instead of running away, he ran toward me, head-on, firing his light machine guns. Suicidal tactics, but they forced me to break off, forced me to dive away to avoid a collision. When I pulled back up, I'd lost sight of them. The sky was empty, just me and a lot of smoke from burning aircraft below. I started climbing back to altitude, looking for my section, looking for threats. That's when I saw him. A single Zero, high and far to the north, flying level, not engaging anyone, just flying. I should have ignored him, should have rejoined my section, but something made me look closer, made me climb toward him. As I got closer, I could see damage on his aircraft. Holes in the wings, panels missing, smoke trailing from the engine. He was flying home, or trying to make it back to base before his aircraft quit on him. I'd been this pilot. 3 years ago, I'd been exactly this pilot, trying to nurse a dying fighter home, knowing I probably wouldn't make it. Someone had let me live that day, had pointed me towards safety, and taken my aircraft instead of my life. I pulled up alongside him, maybe 200 feet away. He saw me, turned his head and looked right at me. We were close enough that I could see his face through his canopy. Young, tired, scared. He knew what was about to happen, knew I had guns and he was helpless. His aircraft was too damaged to fight, too damaged to run. He was dead and he knew it. I looked at him, looked at my gun sight, looked back at him. The smart thing, the military thing, the right thing by every rule of warfare was to shoot him down. He was the enemy. He'd probably killed Americans. Would kill more if he made it home and flew again. Every pilot I let go was another pilot my countrymen would have to face. But I couldn't do it. Couldn't pull the trigger on a helpless man trying to get home. Couldn't be the thing that ended his life when all he was doing was what I'd done, what every pilot did, trying to survive. I pointed down, made the same gesture I'd made 3 years ago. Land, bail out, save yourself. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. Just a small nod, but I saw it. He pushed his stick forward and started descending toward the ocean below. I watched him go down, watched him line up for a water landing, watched him hit the surface and skip once, twice, 3 times before settling. Watched him climb out of the cockpit onto the wing as his aircraft started to sink. Then I turned and flew back toward the fleet. Didn't report the contact, didn't tell anyone what I'd done. Just filed my after-action report with 7 confirmed kills and no mention of the one I'd let go. I never told anyone about that until now, never put it in my combat log, never mentioned it in my debriefings, because I knew what it would sound like. Knew it would sound like dereliction of duty, like mercy toward the enemy, like weakness. Maybe it was all those things, but it was also the only choice I could live with. I'd spent 3 years learning how to kill efficiently. I'd helped develop the tactics that shot down thousands of Japanese pilots. I'd done my job, done it well, contributed to the victory that everyone said was now inevitable. But I wasn't going to become the kind of man who killed helpless pilots just because the rules said I could. I wasn't going to lose the part of me that remembered there were people inside those aircraft, people who probably didn't want to be there any more than I did. The war in the Pacific ended 5 months later. VJ Day, August 15th, 1945. I was still on the Hornet when the news came through. The Japanese had surrendered. No invasion of the home islands, no final apocalyptic battle. Just surrender. Conditional but real. The ship erupted in celebration. Men cheering, crying, hugging each other. The war was over. We'd won. We could go home. I stood on the flight deck and watched the sun set over the Pacific. Watched the same ocean I'd been fighting over for 3 years and felt nothing. Not joy, not relief, not even satisfaction. Just emptiness. I'd survived. That was supposed to mean something, supposed to be enough, but I kept thinking about all the men who hadn't. Jerry Mitchell, my wingman from 1942, who'd been killed over Tarawa. Commander McCluskey, dead from complications from his midway wounds. Hundreds of other pilots I'd known, served with, flown alongside. They weren't here for this moment, and I kept thinking about the Japanese pilots I'd killed. 43 confirmed aerial victories over 3 years of combat. 43 men who had names, who had families, who had lives before the war. Men I'd never know, never meet, never understand. Men I'd killed because that was my job. And 2 men I'd let live. One in 1942, one in 1945. I'd never know what happened to either of them. If they survived the war, if they made it home, if they had families, if they grew old. I'd never know if letting them live was mercy or foolishness. But I knew this. I'd fought the war I was asked to fight. I'd killed when I was ordered to kill. I'd helped develop the tactics that won the air war in the Pacific. I'd done my duty, and I'd done it well. And twice. When the rules said I should kill, when military logic said I should kill, when every practical consideration said I should kill, I'd chosen something else. I'd chosen to see the man inside the machine, to remember that we were all just trying to survive this thing. That choice probably cost American lives. The pilots I let go might have killed men I knew, might have shot down my friends. I've thought about that for 70 years. Thought about whether I made the right decision, whether mercy has a place in war, whether you can follow your conscience and still be a good soldier. I don't have a clean answer. War doesn't offer clean answers. It offers choices between bad options and worse options, between what you're told to do and what you can live with afterward. What I know is this: I can live with the men I killed in combat. They were armed. They were dangerous. They were trying to kill me and my countrymen. That was war, and war makes certain acts necessary and even honorable. But if I'd killed those two helpless pilots, if I'd shot them down when they were damaged and alone and trying to survive, I don't think I could have lived with that. I think that would have changed something essential in me, would have made me into someone I didn't want to be. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I came home in September 1945, mustered out at NAS Norfolk with an honorable discharge, a chest full of medals I never wore, and no clear idea what to do next. The Navy wanted me to stay in, offered me a regular commission, a path to commander or higher. But I'd had enough of war, enough of killing, enough of watching men die. I went back to Nebraska, back to the farm I'd grown up on, back to the fields I'd crop dusted as a teenager. My father had aged 20 years in the 3 I'd been gone. My mother cried when she saw me, touched my face like she couldn't believe I was real. They didn't ask about the war, not at first, not for years. I think they knew that if I wanted to talk about it, I would. I didn't. I couldn't. How do you explain what combat is like to people who've never experienced it? How do you talk about killing men to people who've spent their lives growing crops and raising livestock? I went back to crop dusting, bought a surplus Stearman from the government for $300, rebuilt the engine myself, and started flying the same fields I'd flown before the war. It was peaceful work, solitary work, just me and the aircraft and the endless Nebraska sky. But I couldn't stop thinking about the war. Every time I flew, I'd remember flights over the Pacific. Every time I saw another aircraft, I'd instinctively check if it was friendly or hostile. Every time I heard a sudden noise, I'd flinch, waiting for the sound of guns. They call it combat fatigue now, or PTSD, or operational stress. We didn't have a name for it then. We just called it being jumpy, being on edge. Most veterans had it. Most of us didn't talk about it. You were supposed to come home, adjust, move on, be grateful you'd survived when so many hadn't. I met my wife, Sarah, in 1947. She was a teacher in the local school, smart and kind and patient with my silences. She knew I'd been in the war, knew I'd flown fighters, but she didn't know the details. Didn't know about the Zero I'd stolen, about the pilots I'd let go, about the 43 men I'd killed. I told her some of it on our wedding night. Not all of it, not the worst parts, but enough that she'd understand why I sometimes woke up sweating, why loud noises made me tense, why I preferred to sleep with the windows open so I could hear the sky. She listened without judgment, held my hand, and said something I've never forgotten. You did what you had to do. Now you get to choose what comes next. What came next was a life, a good life. We had 3 children, raised them on the farm, taught them to work hard and be honest and value life. I flew crop dusters for 40 years, taught my son to fly, watched my daughters grow up and have families of their own. But the war never left me. Not completely. I'd be flying over a cornfield and suddenly I'd be back over the Pacific, watching a Zero spiral down in flames. I'd hear a car backfire and I'd be back in a combat turn, hearing the sound of my own guns. I'd see my grandson playing with a toy airplane and I'd remember the faces of pilots I'd killed. In 1985, 40 years after the war ended, I did something I'd been avoiding for decades. I went to a VF-10 reunion in San Diego, the first reunion I'd attended since the war. I don't know why I finally decided to go. Maybe because Sarah pushed me to. Maybe because I was getting older and starting to understand that if I didn't reconnect with that part of my life, I'd lose it forever. There were 23 of us there, out of the hundreds who'd served in the squadron during the war. 23 old men, most with wives, some with grandchildren, all carrying the same weight I was. We recognized it in each other without speaking. The way we scanned rooms, the way we positioned ourselves with our backs to walls, the way we went quiet when planes flew overhead. We told stories, safe stories mostly. The funny incidents, the strange encounters, the moments of unexpected grace. Nobody talked about the bad parts. Nobody mentioned the friends who weren't there. We didn't need to. Their absence said everything. On the last night of the reunion, I had dinner with 3 other pilots from my original squadron. We were the only ones left from the group that had been on the Enterprise at Guadalcanal. Everyone else was dead. Combat, accidents, disease, age. Just the 4 of us remained. After dinner, after our wives had gone back to the hotel, we sat in a bar and finally talked about the things we'd been carrying. Tom Brennan told us about the time he'd had to crash land on the carrier with his gunner dead in the rear seat, killed by a Zero. Robert Chavez told us about shooting down a Japanese bomber and watching 6 men bail out, knowing that only 2 of their parachutes opened. Then they looked at me, asked me about my war, asked me about the Zero I'd stolen. I told them the story. All of it. The pilot I'd let go, the sinking aircraft, the improvised repairs, the PT boat, the testing duty that followed. They listened without interrupting. When I finished, Tom said, "You never reported the pilot you let go." "No," I said. "Why not?" "Because I knew what it would sound like I was soft, like I wasn't doing my job." Robert looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "I let one go too. February 1944, during a strike on truck. Damage 0, trying to limp home. I had the shot. Didn't take it." Tom nodded slowly. "May 1943. We just shot down 4 bombers. Last one was going down, crew bailing out. I could have strafed the parachutes. Some pilots did. I couldn't." We sat in silence after that. 3 old men who'd spent 40 years thinking they were alone in their mercy, alone in their doubt, alone in the choices they'd made that didn't fit the narrative of war as a clean fight between good and evil. "We did what we had to do," Robert said finally. "But we didn't have to do everything we could have done. There's a difference. I think that's the truth I'd been searching for since 1942. The war required us to fight, required us to kill when necessary, required us to put our lives on the line for our country, but it didn't require us to become monsters, didn't require us to lose our humanity in the process of defending it. The men I killed in fair combat, the armed pilots trying to kill me and my countrymen, I've made my peace with that. That was war. That was necessary. But the men I let go, the helpless pilots I chose to spare, I've never regretted those decisions. Never once in 70 years, because the purpose of fighting isn't to kill. The purpose is to protect, to defend, to make it possible for life to continue. And sometimes, the way you protect life is by choosing not to take it, even when you could. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. Sarah died in 2004. We'd been married 57 years. She was the best thing that came out of my war, though she'd hate me saying it that way. She'd say she came out of our life together, not out of the war. But the truth is, I don't think I could have built a life without her patience, without her understanding, without her willingness to love a man who was sometimes still fighting battles that had ended decades ago. After she died, I started thinking more about the war. Not the combat, not the fear, but the choices. The 2 pilots I'd let go. I'd spent my entire life wondering what happened to them, wondering if they survived, wondering if they ever thought about the American pilot who'd spared them. In 2006, my grandson helped me do something I couldn't have done on my own. He's good with computers, with the internet, with all the modern ways of finding information. He helped me search for records of Japanese pilots from the war, looking for anyone who might match the descriptions I had. We didn't find them. The records were incomplete, the names were difficult to match, and 60 years had passed. They were probably dead by then anyway. Most of us were. Time was doing what the war hadn't managed, killing all of us, slowly but completely. But in the searching, I found something else. I found other veterans, American and Japanese, who were talking about the war honestly. Not the propaganda version, not the heroic version, but the real version. The version where good men on both sides did terrible things because war required it, and where sometimes those same men chose mercy when they could have chosen murder. I found a Japanese veteran who wrote about being shot down in 1942, bailing out over the Pacific, and watching an American fighter fly away instead of strafing him in his parachute. He didn't know the pilot's name, didn't know if it was me, but the date and location were right. I found an American pilot who wrote about letting a damaged Zero go in 1945, watching the pilot land in the ocean and swim to safety. He'd never told anyone before, had carried the secret for 60 years, thinking he'd failed his duty. I found dozens of these stories, hundreds maybe, small moments of mercy in the middle of the largest war in human history. They didn't change the outcome of the war, didn't affect the strategies or the battles, but they changed the men who made those choices, allowed us to come home with our humanity intact, allowed us to build lives and families and futures. In 2008, I was invited to speak at a high school about my war experiences. I almost said no. What would I tell them? That war is hell? They knew that. That killing is necessary sometimes? True, but not the kind of thing you tell 16-year-olds. That America won and freedom triumphed? Also true, but incomplete. I decided to tell them about the Zero. About the pilot I let go, about stealing his aircraft, about the choice I made to value survival over killing, about the second pilot, the one I spared in 1945, about the complexity of war, about the choices that don't fit neatly into hero stories. The kids listened quietly, didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions until I was done. Then a girl in the front row raised her hand and said, "Do you think those pilots would have done the same for you?" It was a good question, an important question, the kind that has no easy answer. "I don't know," I told her. "Maybe they would have, maybe they wouldn't. But my choice wasn't about what they might do. It was about who I wanted to be, about what I could live with afterward." Another kid asked, "Do you think you did the right thing?" "I think I did the only thing I could do and still be the person I wanted to be when the war was over," I said. "I killed a lot of men in that war. 43 confirmed, probably more. That was my job, and I did it. But twice, I had the chance to choose mercy over duty, humanity over military logic. I took that chance. I'd take it again." After the talk, several kids came up to thank me. One boy, quiet kid who'd sat in the back, said something that stayed with me. "My grandfather was at Iwo Jima. He never talked about the war. Died last year. Never told us anything about what he did. I wish he'd told me it was complicated. I wish he'd told me you could do your duty and still question it." That's what I've been trying to do for the last decade, in the time I have left. Tell the complicated story, not the clean story about heroes and villains, victory and defeat, but the real story about men trying to survive, trying to do their duty, trying to hold on to their humanity in circumstances designed to destroy it. I'm 92 years old now. Most of the men I served with are dead. Most of the Japanese pilots I fought against are dead. The carriers are scrapped, the aircraft are in museums, the battles are ancient history. Soon, everyone who remembers the war firsthand will be gone, and it'll just be in books and movies and documentaries. But I want to add this to the record while I still can. War is necessary sometimes. Evil exists, and it has to be fought. I don't regret serving, don't regret fighting, don't regret contributing to the defeat of Imperial Japan. We were right to fight that war, but war doesn't erase morality. It doesn't suspend conscience. It doesn't make us into machines that just follow orders without thought. Every human being in war makes choices, hundreds of them, thousands of them. Most of those choices are between bad options and worse options. But sometimes, rarely, you get a choice between following the rules and following your conscience, between doing what you're supposed to do and doing what you can live with. I got that choice twice. Both times I chose conscience over rules, mercy over duty. I let 2 enemy pilots live when I could have killed them, when I was supposed to kill them, when every military regulation said I should kill them. I don't know what happened to those pilots. Don't know if they survived the war, if they went home to families, if they had children and grandchildren who are alive today because I made the choice I made. Don't know if they killed Americans after I let them go, if my mercy cost other people their lives. What I do know is this: I can live with the men I killed in combat. I've made my peace with that. But I could not have lived with killing helpless men who were no threat to me or anyone else in those moments. I could not have lived with being that person. Maybe that makes me weak. Maybe it makes me a bad soldier. Maybe it means I failed my duty. I've thought about that for 70 years, and I still don't have a perfect answer. But I know this: I came home from the war still recognizing myself in the mirror. I built a life, raised a family, loved a woman for 57 years. I sleep without nightmares most nights. I can look at airplanes without flinching. I can hear my grandchildren laugh without thinking about all the children who died in the war. I think those 2 choices, those 2 moments of mercy, helped make that possible. Helped me remember that underneath the uniform and the training and the mission, I was still a human being with a conscience. Still someone who could choose compassion when the circumstances allowed it. The war changed me. It changed everyone who fought in it. But it didn't destroy me, didn't turn me into something I wasn't. And I think those 2 Japanese pilots, wherever they ended up, helped make that possible. By being human in their desperation, by looking at me with the same fear and hope I felt, they reminded me that we were all just trying to survive. That's what I want people to remember about the war. Not just the heroism, not just the sacrifice, not just the victory, but the humanity that persisted even in the middle of industrial-scale killing. The moments when enemies chose to see each other as people. The choices that didn't change the outcome of battles, but changed the lives of the men who made them. I'm telling this story now because I'm running out of time. Because someone should know that the war wasn't as simple as the history books make it seem. Because the next generation deserves to understand that doing your duty and questioning your duty aren't contradictory. Because mercy and strength aren't opposites. And because somewhere, maybe in Japan, maybe in America, maybe somewhere else entirely, there might be families who exist because of a choice I made 70 years ago. Children who were born because their grandfather survived the war. Grandchildren who will never know that an American pilot they've never heard of decided not to pull a trigger when he could have. That's my legacy, maybe. Not the 43 pilots I shot down, not the tactics I helped develop, not the medals or the commendations or the combat reports, but 2 pilots I didn't kill. 2 moments when I chose to be human instead of just a weapon. I don't know if I'm a hero or a failure, don't know if I did the right thing or the wrong thing, don't even know if there is a right thing in war, or if it's all just shades of gray between terrible choices. What I know is this: I'm 92 years old, and I can still see those 2 pilots' faces as clearly as I did 70 years ago. I can still remember the moment our eyes met, still remember choosing life over death, mercy over duty, humanity over regulation, and I've never regretted it. Not once, not in 70 years. I'd make the same choice tomorrow if I could. That's my story. That's what I wanted to share before time runs out. Not a story about heroism or victory or military glory, but a story about staying human in the middle of inhumanity, about making choices you can live with, not just choices that follow orders, about remembering that inside every enemy aircraft is a person who probably doesn't want to be there any more than you do. The war ended 77 years ago. Most of us who fought it are gone. Soon, all of us will be. But I wanted to leave this behind. You can do your duty and still be merciful. You can fight with courage and still choose compassion when circumstances allow. You can kill when you must and spare when you can. That's what I learned flying fighters in the Pacific. That's what I learned stealing a Zero at Guadalcanal. That's what I learned in 3 years of combat and 70 years of remembering. War doesn't erase your humanity unless you let it. The choice is always yours. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. It means the next generation might learn something from the choices we made, the good ones and the bad ones. It means maybe, somehow, we can do better next time. If there is a next time. God willing, there won't be. Wildcat started spinning. Guadalcanal was 15 miles behind me. The carrier USS Enterprise 22 miles ahead. Altitude, 8,000 feet and dropping fast. Black oil covered my windscreen. I had maybe 90 seconds before I'd have to bail out over shark-infested water, or do something no American pilot had ever done. October 13th, 1942. The radio was dead. My Pratt & Whitney engine was coughing like a drowning man. I could hear metal grinding against metal somewhere in the cowling. The stick felt loose in my hands, like trying to steer a car with a broken axle. Below me, nothing but Pacific Ocean stretching to the horizon. Above me, the Zero that had just shot me down was circling back to finish the job. I'd gotten cocky, that was the truth of it. Shot down 2 Zeros that morning during the dawn patrol, thought I was invincible. Thought I'd learned everything there was to know about aerial combat in my 6 months in the Pacific. The Japanese pilot who got me was better. Came out of the sun, exactly where I should have been looking, but wasn't. 3 seconds of gunfire and my war was supposed to be over. But I'd grown up crop dusting in Nebraska. Started flying my father's old Stearman when I was 14, before I even had a driver's license. Spent 5 summers buzzing cornfields at 50 feet, learning what an aircraft could do when you stopped thinking about what the manual said and started listening to what the plane was telling you. That Stearman taught me something the Navy flight school never did. A damaged aircraft doesn't want to kill you. It wants to fly. You just have to figure out what it needs. The Wildcat was telling me it wanted to go right. The torn wing was creating drag, pulling us into a spiral. I stopped fighting it. Let the stick drift right. Gave it a little rudder, felt the spin slow down. Not stop, but slow. The altimeter read 6,000 feet. I had time. Not much, but some. That's when I saw it. 2 miles east, maybe 3,000 feet below me, a Zero was trailing smoke. Not the thick black smoke of a fatal hit, but the gray-white smoke of a damaged engine running too rich. It was losing altitude slowly, heading west toward the Japanese-held islands. The pilot was probably thinking the same thing I was. Can I make it home? He couldn't see me. The sun was behind me now, and he was focused on keeping his crippled fighter in the air. I watched him for maybe 10 seconds, working the problem in my head. My Wildcat was dying. His Zero was dying slower. The Enterprise was too far. Guadalcanal was barely in American hands. Henderson Field was under constant bombardment. But there was a third option nobody had ever tried. I pushed the stick forward and went after him. The Wildcat didn't want to dive. The damaged wing screamed in protest, the whole airframe shuddering like it was going to come apart. Oil pressure was dropping, cylinder head temperature climbing into the red. I had maybe 2 minutes of engine time left, probably less, but I was closing the distance. 1,800 feet, 1,500, 1,200. He still hadn't seen me. He was too busy with his own emergency, probably going through the same calculations I'd been doing. Ditch in the ocean and hope for rescue. Try to make it to Rabaul, 300 miles away. His aircraft was handling better than mine, but not by much. 900 feet. I could see the tail number now, see the red circle on the fuselage, could see the pilot's head moving in the cockpit, checking gauges, looking for a place to set down. I thought about my .50 caliber guns, still loaded, still working. Thought about how easy it would be, how I was supposed to. But I didn't, because I needed what he had. 600 feet. Close enough now that he must have heard me, because his head snapped around and I saw his face. Young, maybe younger than me. His eyes went wide. He knew what was about to happen, knew I had guns and he was a sitting duck. His Zero banked hard left, trying to evade, but the maneuver cost him altitude and speed he couldn't afford. More smoke poured from his engine. He was finished and he knew it. I pulled up alongside him, maybe 50 feet of air between us, close enough to see every detail of his aircraft, close enough to see him looking at me, his hand on his stick, waiting for the bullets that were going to kill him. I pointed down, made an exaggerated gesture toward the ocean. Then I pointed at him and made a parachute motion with my hands. He stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. His engine seized right then, just locked up solid. The propeller stopped turning. The Zero's nose dropped, and he went into a glide. He had maybe 30 seconds before he hit the water. I watched him make his decision. Saw him reach up and pull the canopy release. Saw him unstrap and stand up in the cockpit as the Zero fell away beneath him. His parachute opened at 800 feet. I watched him float down toward the water, watched the Zero hit the ocean and cartwheel across the surface before sinking. Then I put my dying Wildcat into a dive and went after what was left of his aircraft. The Zero had broken into 3 main pieces. The tail section was already gone, straight to the bottom. The mid-fuselage was half submerged and sinking fast, but the nose section, with the engine and cockpit, was floating. The empty fuel tanks in the wings were acting like pontoons, keeping it on the surface. I had maybe 3 minutes before it went under. I put the Wildcat down hard, wheels up, skipping across the swells like a stone. The impact felt like driving into a brick wall at 60 miles an hour. My head snapped forward, then back. The harness cut into my shoulders. Water exploded over the canopy. For a second, I thought I'd misjudged it, thought I was going straight to the bottom. But the Wildcat had been built tough. It slowed, settled, and started floating. I had maybe 2 minutes before it sank. I popped the canopy and climbed out onto the wing. The Zero's nose section was 40 feet away, drifting in the current. I could see the Japanese pilot in the water, maybe 100 yards beyond his aircraft, watching me. Neither of us moved. We just looked at each other across that stretch of ocean. 2 pilots who should have been dead, both of us thinking things we'd never say out loud. Then I dove in and started swimming. The water was warm, warmer than I'd expected. Clear enough to see 20 feet down. Clear enough to see the shapes moving in the depths below me. I didn't think about them. Didn't think about anything except getting to that Zero before it sank. The cockpit was half full of water when I reached it. The canopy was still open from when the pilot had bailed out. I grabbed the frame and pulled myself up, water pouring off me, my flight suit heavy and dragging. The instrument panel was in Japanese, obviously, but the stick was a stick, the throttle was a throttle, the basic controls were the same, had to be. Physics didn't care what language you spoke. The engine was dead, but the propeller turned freely when I spun it by hand. No seize, no catastrophic damage. Just an overheat, maybe a failed fuel pump. The wings were intact. The tail was gone, but that didn't matter for what I needed. I looked back at the Wildcat. It was settling lower in the water, the nose starting to dip. Maybe 90 seconds left. Behind it, maybe 3 miles away now, I could see the Japanese pilot swimming toward one of the small islands. He'd make it. He was young and strong, and the sea was calm. I turned back to the Zero and started doing something so insane that 70 years later I still can't quite believe I tried it. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. The Zero's engine was a Nakajima Saki, 14 cylinders, radial configuration, different from the Pratt & Whitney in my Wildcat, but not that different. Same basic principles: air, fuel, spark, compression. The Japanese had better metallurgy, tighter tolerances, but at the end of the day, an engine was an engine. I'd spent my teenage years taking apart farm equipment, combines, tractors, threshers, anything with an engine. My father used to say I could fix a tractor with baling wire and prayer. He wasn't far wrong. The summer I turned 16, I rebuilt the engine in our Stearman with parts from a junked Whippet automobile and a broken water pump. It flew. This was the same thing, just wetter and with more urgency. The Zero was sinking, slowly but steadily. Water was up to the seat now, rising an inch every few seconds. I had to work fast. First thing, figure out why it quit. I traced the fuel lines with my hands, feeling for breaks, for disconnects. Found it at the carburetor. A linkage had shaken loose, probably from combat damage earlier. The engine had been running lean, got too hot, and the pilot had shut it down before it seized. I pulled the linkage back into place, used my bootlace to tie it secure. Crude, but it would hold. Maybe. Next problem? Ignition. The magnetos were waterlogged. I pulled them out one at a time, shook them out, blew water out of the connections. In Nebraska, I'd learned that most electrical problems came down to moisture. Get things dry, they usually worked. Usually, the water was up to my chest now. The Zero was definitely going down. I had maybe 60 seconds. I climbed up onto the seat, braced my feet against the control panel, and grabbed the propeller through the open cockpit. In the Stearman, when the battery was dead, we'd hand prop it, spin the propeller fast enough, and if everything else was right, the engine would catch. I'd done it 100 times. Never in a sinking Japanese fighter in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, but there's a first time for everything. I spun the prop, nothing. Spun it again, harder, nothing. The water was at my neck now. One more try, and if it didn't work, I was swimming. I spun the propeller with everything I had, felt something catch, heard a cylinder fire, then another, then the whole engine roared to life in a cloud of black smoke and spray. The Zero lurched forward. I fell back into the cockpit, into water that was now churning from the propeller wash. The aircraft was moving, but it was also still sinking. The nose was underwater, the tail was gone, and I was sitting in what was essentially a powered bathtub with wings. But it was moving forward, and as it moved, it started to rise. The principle was the same as a seaplane. Get moving fast enough, and the wings would generate lift. Not enough to fly, not without a tail, but enough to plane across the surface. Maybe enough to stay afloat. I pushed the throttle forward. The engine responded, coughing and sputtering, but running. The Zero accelerated, water pouring off the wings, the nose lifting slightly. 50 feet, 100 feet, 200 feet. I was hydroplaning in a Japanese fighter with no tail, no radio, and no real plan beyond not drowning. That's when I saw the patrol boat, American PT boat, running full out about a mile to the south. They must have seen the fighters go down, must have been coming to look for survivors. They'd seen me now too. I could see sailors on deck pointing. Could see the deck guns starting to traverse in my direction. They thought I was Japanese. Of course they did. I was in a Zero, flying a Japanese flag. From their perspective, I was the enemy. I needed to signal them somehow, needed to show I was American. But the Zero had no signal flares, no smoke markers, nothing. Just a dead radio and a flag I couldn't reach to tear down. The PT boat opened fire. I saw the muzzle flashes, saw the water erupt in geysers around me. They were ranging in, getting the distance. Next burst would hit. I did the only thing I could think of. I started flying toward them. Not away, like a Japanese pilot would. Toward them, straight at them. And I started waving out of the cockpit, both arms, as obviously American as I could manage while trying to keep a tailless fighter from nosing into the water. They stopped shooting. I could see confusion on the deck. Could see an officer with binoculars trying to figure out what he was looking at. A Zero flying toward them with someone waving from the cockpit. It didn't make sense. I kept coming, kept waving. The PT boat started to turn, bringing more guns to bear, but they weren't firing, not yet. They were trying to understand. I was 100 yards away when the engine quit again. Just died all at once. The linkage must have let go, or the fuel pump finally gave up, or a dozen other things that could go wrong with a dying engine did. The Zero settled into the water, still moving forward from momentum, but slowing fast. The PT boat came alongside. Sailors lined the rail, rifles ready, pointed down at me. An officer leaned over, shouted something I couldn't hear over the sound of water rushing into the cockpit. I stood up, hands visible, and shouted back. "Lieutenant Frank Sullivan, VF-10, USS Enterprise. Don't shoot, for God's sake." There was a long pause, the longest pause of my life. Then the officer started laughing. Actually laughing. He shouted down to me, "You just flew a goddamn Zero at us, Lieutenant." "Didn't have much choice," I shouted back. "You gonna shoot me or pull me out?" They pulled me out. Took 3 sailors to haul me up over the side, my flight suit weighing about 50 pounds from all the water. I collapsed on the deck, coughing, shaking, suddenly aware of how close I'd come to dying about 6 different ways in the last 10 minutes. The officer stood over me. Lieutenant Commander Harrison, his name tag said. He was still smiling, shaking his head. "I've been in this man's Navy for 15 years, he said. "Never seen anything like that. You're either the bravest pilot in the Pacific or the craziest." "Probably both," I said. They fished me back to the fleet. The Enterprise was heading north, away from Guadalcanal, after the morning's air battles. The PT boat radioed ahead, told them they were bringing in a VF-10 pilot who'd done something impossible. By the time we reached the carrier, half the air wing was on deck waiting to see if the story was true. It was Commander Wade McCluskey who helped me onto the flight deck. He was the CAG, the air group commander, the man who'd led the dive bombers at Midway 4 months earlier and changed the war. He looked at me standing there dripping seawater, looked at the PT boat crew who were all grinning and talking at once and said, "Sullivan, tell me you didn't do what they say you did." "Depends on what they said, sir. They said you stole a Japanese Zero and tried to fly it home." "Wasn't exactly stealing, sir. The previous owner had vacated the aircraft." McCluskey stared at me for a long moment. Then he started laughing, deep, genuine laughter that made the other pilots join in. "You're completely insane," he said. "But I want a full report on my desk in 2 hours. Every detail. If what you learned can help us kill more of these bastards, I want to know it." That report ended up being 40 pages long. I wrote down everything I could remember about the Zero's cockpit layout, its controls, its engine management, its handling characteristics, things I'd observed in those few minutes that might give our pilots an edge. The Navy distributed copies to every carrier in the Pacific. 3 months later, they flew a captured Zero to San Diego, and test pilots confirmed everything I'd written. But that night, after the debriefing, after the medical check, after the mandatory psych evaluation where the doctor asked me repeatedly if I understood how close I'd come to being killed, I sat alone in my bunk and thought about the Japanese pilot I'd let go. His name was something I'd never know. His face was something I'd never forget. Young, scared, caught in the same meat grinder I was. We could have killed each other, should have, by all the rules of warfare. Instead, I'd pointed him towards salvation and taken his aircraft. He'd probably been picked up by a Japanese patrol, probably went back to fighting, might have shot down more Americans, might have killed my friends. I didn't regret it. Still don't, 70 years later. In that moment above the Pacific, watching his engine die, I'd seen something I couldn't unsee. We were the same. Different uniforms, different flags, different languages, but the same. 2 pilots trying not to die. 2 young men a long way from home, flying machines that wanted to kill us, fighting a war neither of us had started. The mathematics of survival had given me a choice. Kill him and ditch my aircraft, try to swim for Guadalcanal, probably die in the attempt. Or let him live and take his aircraft, use it to stay alive long enough for rescue. I'd chosen survival. His and mine both. The Navy put me in for a medal. I don't remember which one. Don't remember if it was ever approved. Don't really care. What I remember is the moment I met his eyes across 50 feet of air, and the understanding that passed between us. We'd been trying to kill each other minutes before. Now we were trying to save each other. War made no sense. I flew 43 more combat missions after that day. Shot down 3 more Japanese aircraft. Lost friends, good men, pilots who'd been flying formation with me 1 minute and gone the next. Watched carriers burn. Watched aircraft fall into the sea with men still trapped inside. Did things I'm not proud of and things I am. That's war. That's what it costs. But the mission I remember, the one that still comes to me in dreams, is the one where I didn't fire my guns. The one where I chose something other than killing. The one where I flew a Zero. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. The report I filed went through channels for 3 weeks before it reached Admiral Nimitz's desk. By then, I was back in rotation, flying cap missions over the Enterprise, trying not to think too hard about what had happened. Trying to get back to the routine of war. Brief, fly, fight, debrief, sleep, repeat. but the air wing knew what I'd done. Word spread fast on a carrier. By the time we reached Pearl Harbor for resupply in November, pilots from other squadrons were coming up to me in the officers' mess, asking questions. How did the Zero handle? Was it really faster than the Wildcat? Could you outturn it? What about the engine, the guns, the visibility from the cockpit? I answered what I could. Told them the Zero was lighter, more maneuverable at low speeds. Told them it had better range, better climb rate. Told them what I'd figured out in those few minutes in the cockpit, and what I'd read in the intelligence reports that had been floating around since we'd captured one mostly intact in the Aleutians. But what they really wanted to know was how I'd had the guts to try it, how I'd looked at a sinking enemy fighter and thought, I can fly that. The truth was simpler than they wanted to hear. I hadn't thought about it. Not really. There'd been no time for thought, no time for doubt. Just a problem that needed solving, and tools at hand to solve it. The Zero was a tool. A good one, as it turned out. The Japanese had built an excellent fighter. We'd built a tougher one, but theirs was more elegant. My father used to say that a good mechanic respects all tools, even the ones made by the competition. He'd been talking about Ford versus Chevy, but the principle held. The Zero was designed by smart engineers trying to solve the same problems we were: how to build a fighter that could reach distant targets, maneuver in combat, and bring the pilot home. They'd made different choices than we had, emphasized different qualities, but the goal was the same. In Pearl Harbor, the intelligence officers got hold of me. They wanted everything. Dimensions, materials, construction methods, anything I could remember. I sat in a room with 3 commanders and a captain, going over my report line by line, expanding on details, drawing sketches of the cockpit layout from memory. The throttle quadrant, one of them said, tapping my sketch. You said it operated backward from ours? Yes, sir. Push forward to reduce power. Pull back to increase. Opposite of what we do. That could cost lives, the captain said. If one of our pilots ever has to fly one in an emergency, that reversal could be fatal. It could, I agreed. But if you know it's reversed, you adapt. It's just a convention. The engine doesn't care which direction you move the lever. They looked at each other. The captain said, You adapted in what, 30 seconds? Didn't have a choice, sir. The aircraft was sinking. Most pilots would have swum for it. Most pilots didn't grow up flying crop dusters with controls held together with baling wire. You learn to adapt or you crash. I didn't want to crash. The captain smiled at that. The Admiral wants to meet you, he said. Tomorrow, 0900 hours, full dress uniform. Try to look less like a Nebraska farm boy and more like an officer in the United States Navy. I met Admiral Nimitz in his office overlooking the harbor. He was shorter than I'd expected, but he had the presence of a man who commanded the entire Pacific Theater. He stood when I entered, which surprised me, and gestured to a chair. Lieutenant Sullivan, he said, I read your report 3 times. Remarkable work. Thank you, sir. The technical details alone are worth the cost of a dozen reconnaissance flights. But what interests me more is the thinking behind your actions. You saw an opportunity others would have missed. Why? I thought about that. Permission to speak freely, sir? Granted. Most pilots are trained to think in terms of air combat tactics. Maneuvers, gun solutions, formation flying, all important. But before I was a pilot, I was a mechanic. I see aircraft as machines first, weapons second. When my Wildcat was dying, I didn't think about fighting. I thought about the problem. I need a working aircraft. There was one nearby. It happened to be Japanese, but that didn't change the mechanics of the situation. Nimitz nodded slowly. You divorced the tool from the politics. Yes, sir. The Zero wasn't my enemy. The pilot flying it was. Once he was out of it, it was just a machine. A machine I could use. Not many men think that way in combat. Maybe not, sir. But I grew up poor. We couldn't afford to throw things away just because they came from the wrong factory. You used what worked. Nimitz stood, walked to the window, looked out at the harbor where the Arizona still lay half submerged, oil still leaking from her hull. We're fighting an enemy who's shown us they're willing to die for their cause, he said. Our advantage isn't that we're braver or more willing to sacrifice. It's that we're more pragmatic. We adapt. We use what works regardless of where it came from. You demonstrated that principle perfectly. He turned back to me. I'm recommending you for a new assignment. Test pilot training. We're setting up a program to evaluate captured enemy aircraft, determine their strengths and weaknesses, develop tactics to exploit those weaknesses. Your report showed us you think like an engineer and fly like a fighter pilot. That's rare. We need more men like you. Sir, I'm a combat pilot. My squadron will survive without you. VF-10 has plenty of good pilots. What we don't have enough of are pilots who can tell us how to beat the Japanese at their own game." He paused. "This isn't a request, Lieutenant. It's an assignment. You report to NAS Patuxent River in 3 weeks. Dismissed." I saluted and left, my mind reeling. Test pilot. Flying captured enemy aircraft. It was an honor, the kind of assignment most pilots would kill for. It was also a removal from combat, from the carrier, from the men I'd trained with and flown with for the last 6 months. That night, I got drunk with my squadron mates in a bar in Honolulu. They were happy for me, or said they were. "You're going to be famous," Jerry Mitchell said. He was my wingman. Had been since flight school. "Test pilot Sullivan, flying Zeros and Messerschmitts. They'll write articles about you." "I'd rather be flying with you," I said. "No, you wouldn't. You'd rather be alive. And test pilots don't get shot at." He raised his glass. "To Frank Sullivan, the only man crazy enough to steal a Zero and smart enough to get away with it." We drank to that, drank to a lot of things that night, to the men who hadn't made it home, to the missions still to fly, to the war that seemed like it would never end, to the slim hope that maybe, somehow, we'd all survive this thing. I shipped out 3 days later on a transport heading east, watched the Enterprise grow smaller behind us, watched Hawaii sink below the horizon. I didn't know it then, but I'd never see most of those men again. Jerry Mitchell would be killed over Tarawa in 1943. Commander McCluskey would survive the war, but die young from injuries suffered at Midway. The Enterprise herself would survive, but barely, scarred and battered by dozens of battles. But that day, sailing east toward a new assignment, I was thinking about something else. I was thinking about the Japanese pilot I'd let go, wondering if he'd made it home, wondering if he'd told his squadron what had happened, wondering if there was a Japanese version of my story circulating somewhere, about the American pilot who could have killed him but didn't. Probably not. War doesn't work that way. War wants clear stories, heroes and villains, victory and defeat. It doesn't want complicated stories about mercy and survival and the strange calculations you make when death is 50 feet away. But I remember it. Remember his face. Remember the moment we looked at each other and chose not to kill. That memory has stayed with me longer than the kills I made, longer than the medals I was awarded, longer than most of the war itself. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. Patuxent River in January 1943 was cold, flat, and nothing like the Pacific. The test flight center was new, buildings still going up, runways being expanded. They had a collection of captured aircraft that would have made any aviation enthusiast weep. German Messerschmitts, Italian Machis, Japanese Zeros and Bettys. Aircraft that had been shot down, forced down, or abandoned and recovered by advancing troops. My job was to fly them. All of them. Learn their characteristics, test their limits, write reports that would help our combat pilots exploit their weaknesses. It was methodical work, scientific work, nothing like the chaos of carrier combat. The first aircraft they gave me was a Zero, naturally, not the same one I tried to fly at Guadalcanal, but the same model. A6M2, captured intact in the Aleutians when the pilot got lost in fog and ran out of fuel. It had been repaired, test-flown, and cleared for evaluation. I climbed into that cockpit with a strange sense of déjà vu. The instruments were still in Japanese, but I'd learned to read them by now, had studied the manuals that intelligence had translated. Everything was familiar from those frantic minutes in the Pacific. The backward throttle, the sensitive controls, the visibility that was better than almost any American fighter. I took it up on a cold January morning, the Chesapeake Bay gray and choppy below me. The Zero climbed like a homesick angel, just like I remembered. Light, responsive, eager. At 10,000 feet, I started putting it through its paces. Rolls, loops, spins, stalls. Every maneuver in the book. It was a beautiful aircraft. Deadly, but beautiful. The engineers who designed it had understood something fundamental. Air combat was about energy management. The Zero conserved energy better than anything else in the sky. It could outturn, outclimb, and outrange almost any opponent. But it had weaknesses. The light weight that made it maneuverable also made it fragile. The lack of armor that gave it range also made it vulnerable. The guns were lighter than ours, the ammunition capacity lower, and at high speeds, above 300 knots, the controls became heavy, sluggish. The Zero was built for dogfighting at medium speeds, not for the high-speed diving attacks that American pilots were learning to favor. I wrote all of this down in my reports. Recommended tactics. Don't dogfight. Use speed and altitude. Make one pass and break away. Use our superior firepower and armor. The same tactics that pilots like Jimmy Thatch were developing independently in the Pacific, proven now by systematic testing. Over the next 18 months, I flew 37 captured enemy aircraft. Zeros, Oscars, Tojos, Franks, German FW-190s and BF-109s that had been shipped over from Europe, Italian fighters that handled like sports cars but couldn't take a hit. Each one taught me something new about aviation engineering, about the trade-offs you made when designing a fighter. But I kept thinking about that day over Guadalcanal, kept thinking about the choice I'd made and what it meant. In the test center, flying enemy aircraft was clinical, analytical. We were scientists studying specimens, but out there in combat, those aircraft had pilots inside them. Men like me. Men who were trying to kill me, but men nonetheless. The other test pilots didn't think much about that. They saw the aircraft as enemies, extensions of the men who flew them. When we found a weakness, they celebrated. "That's another 100 Zeros we'll shoot down," someone would say. I celebrated too. I wasn't a pacifist. I wanted to win the war, wanted to beat the Japanese, wanted to make sure American pilots came home alive. But I couldn't forget that every Zero we learned to kill meant a pilot like that young man I'd watched parachute into the Pacific. Someone who'd probably been drafted like me. Someone who'd probably rather have been home like me. War doesn't leave room for that kind of thinking. You push it down, focus on the mission, do your job. I did my job well. My reports helped develop the tactics that would dominate the air war in the Pacific for the rest of the conflict. The Thatch weave, the boom and zoom attacks, the use of superior firepower and armor to negate the Zero's advantages, all of these were built on understanding the enemy's aircraft, and that understanding came from pilots like me flying captured planes. By mid-1944, the war had turned. We were island hopping across the Pacific, pushing the Japanese back toward their home islands. The Zeros that had dominated the sky in 1942 were increasingly obsolete, outmatched by our new Hellcats and Corsairs. The tactics we'd developed were working. American pilots were winning at ratios that would have seemed impossible 2 years earlier. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt tired. I'd been at war for 3 years, flying nearly every day, testing aircraft that had been flown by men who were now dead or captured. I'd seen the evolution of aerial warfare, watched as both sides built better and deadlier machines, watched the kill ratios climb and the losses mount. In August 1944, they offered me a promotion and a training command. I'd be teaching new pilots, passing on what I'd learned. It was a good offer, a safe offer. I was 24 years old and felt 50. The smart thing would have been to take it. I didn't take it. I requested a return to combat duty. They asked me why, and I didn't have a good answer. Or rather, I had an answer I couldn't articulate. Something about needing to see it through, needing to be there when it ended, needing to know that all the reports I'd written and the tactics I'd developed actually worked in the place where it mattered. Maybe I also needed to know if I could still do it. 3 years of test flying had made me a better technical pilot, but combat flying wasn't about being technical. It was about making split-second decisions with incomplete information while someone was trying to kill you. I'd done it once, in 1942. Could I still do it now? They assigned me to VF-17, the Jolly Rogers, flying F-4U Corsairs off the USS Hornet. By then, the Corsair had overcome its early problems and become arguably the best carrier fighter in the war. Fast, powerful, heavily armed. Nothing like the Wildcat I'd flown at Guadalcanal. I joined them in September, just in time for the Philippines campaign. My first flight back in combat was a strike on Japanese airfields near Manila. 20 Corsairs, escorting a bomber strike, expecting heavy resistance. It was nothing like 1942. The Japanese didn't have the numbers anymore, didn't have the experienced pilots. The few that came up to intercept us were poorly trained, predictable. We shot down 12 Japanese fighters without losing a single aircraft. It wasn't a fight, it was slaughter. I got one of them, a Zero that tried to turn with me and paid for it. Watched my .50 caliber rounds tear through his wing, watched him spiral down into the jungle below. Felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, no guilt. Just a kind of hollow completion. Mission accomplished. Target destroyed. Moving on. That night, back on the Hornet, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that Zero pilot, the one I'd shot down. Had he been the same age as the pilot I'd let go in 1942? Had he been trained at the same base, flown with the same unit? Had he known, in those final seconds, that he'd been outmatched?